She thought saving his life would change everything between them. But Naomi Brooks had no idea that one moment of compassion would ignite a scandal that would tear through their small Georgia town like wildfire. For 6 months, she'd been invisible to Ethan Caldwell, just another black maid cleaning his pristine white mansion, enduring his casual racism while sending money home to her sister. But when he collapsed in his kitchen, gasping for air and turning blue, everything shifted in ways neither of them saw coming. Now, anonymous threats are flooding her phone. His high society aunt is plotting her downfall, and the whole town is watching their every move. Because in Cedar Falls, a friendship between a black woman and a white man isn't just gossip, it's grounds for war. What Naomi doesn't know yet is that the biggest betrayal won't come from strangers in the shadows. It will come from someone she's learning to trust. Will love survive when the whole world seems determined to destroy it, or will the price of crossing social lines prove too dangerous to pay? Subscribe now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know where my amazing viewers are tuning in tonight. The early morning light filtered through the white lace curtains of the Caldwell house, casting soft shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Naomi Brooks moved through the quiet rooms like a whisper, her footsteps barely making a sound as she began her daily routine. At 26, she had perfected the art of being invisible, a skill that served her well in this job and in this town. She started in the living room, running her cloth over the dark mahogany coffee table and straightening the magazines that were already perfectly aligned. The house was beautiful, she had to admit. High ceilings, crown molding, and furniture that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. But beauty didn't make a home warm, and this house felt as cold as the man who owned it. Naomi moved to the kitchen, her favorite room in the house. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, making the granite countertops sparkle. She liked this room because it felt alive somehow, even when it was empty. Maybe it was because this was where she could create something, where she could cook and clean and make things better, even if just for a moment. She filled the coffee maker with fresh water and measured out the dark roast that Mr. Caldwell preferred. Strong and bitter, like his personality, she thought to herself. As the coffee began to brew, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, she heard footsteps on the stairs above. Ethan Caldwell was 29 years old and looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for expensive clothes, tall with sandy brown hair that was always perfectly styled and green eyes that seemed to look right through her. He had the kind of confident walk that came from never having to worry about money or what people thought of him. Well, what the right people thought of him anyway. "Morning," he said as he entered the kitchen, not really looking at her. He never really looked at her. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," Naomi replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Your coffee will be ready in just a minute." He nodded and picked up his phone from the counter, immediately absorbed in whatever messages had come in overnight. Naomi moved around him efficiently, getting his favorite mug from the cabinet, the blue one with the university logo, and setting it on the counter next to the cream he liked. "I need the upstairs bathroom cleaned again today," he said without looking up. "My Aunt Martha is coming by later this week and she notices everything." "Yes, sir. I'll make sure it's perfect. And that spot on the carpet in the guest room, did you get that out?" Naomi felt her jaw tighten slightly. She had spent an hour working on that stain yesterday, using every trick she knew. "Yes, sir. It's gone." "Good." He pocketed his phone and reached for his coffee. As he took a sip, he finally glanced at her, but it was the kind of look you'd give a piece of furniture, checking to make sure it was still there and working properly. "I'll be working from home today, so try to keep the noise down upstairs." "Of course." He headed toward his home office, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Naomi, when you're dusting the bookshelves, be careful with the leather-bound books. Some of them are family heirlooms." His tone suggested he didn't think she was smart enough to know the difference between valuable books and regular ones. After he left, Naomi stood alone in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. The job paid well, better than anything else she could find in this small Georgia town, better than the diner where she'd worked before, where customers left messes on purpose just to watch her clean them up, better than the grocery store where the manager followed her around like she might steal something. This job let her send money home to help her younger sister Lila finish college. This job gave her a place to live in the small apartment above the garage. This job was her ticket to something better, even if she had to swallow her pride every single day to keep it. She climbed the stairs to begin cleaning the second floor, her cleaning supplies organized neatly in her caddy. The house was always spotless, but she cleaned it anyway because that's what she was paid to do. As she worked, she could hear Ethan's voice drifting from his office, probably on a conference call for his family's real estate business. The Caldwells owned half the buildings in downtown Cedar Falls, including the apartment complex where most of the black families lived, including the building where Naomi had grown up, in a cramped two-bedroom unit with thin walls and a heater that only worked sometimes. She wondered if Ethan even knew. That? Probably not. Rich people didn't usually know much about the lives of the people they collected rent from. She was dusting the hallway table when she heard her name mentioned. Ethan's office door was slightly open, and his voice carried clearly. "I'm telling you, Aunt Martha, it's temporary," he was saying. "Just until I find someone more suitable." Naomi froze, her cloth hovering over the picture frame in her hand. It was a photo of Ethan at his college graduation, smiling broadly with his arms around an older white woman and a distinguished-looking man. "I know you don't approve of having her in the house," Ethan continued, "but she's quiet. She does good work, and she doesn't ask questions. What more do I need?" There was a pause while whoever was on the other end, Aunt Martha apparently, responded. "Look, I'm not stupid," Ethan said, his voice getting slightly annoyed. "I know what people are saying, but it's not like that. She's just the help. She knows her place." Naomi's hand trembled slightly as she set down the picture frame. She knows her place. The words hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd heard worse, much worse. But somehow, hearing it from him, said so casually, made it hurt more than usual. "She's not going to be a problem," Ethan went on. "Trust me. She's grateful for the job, and she won't do anything to mess it up. These people never do." These people. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, feeling that familiar, tight feeling in her chest. The same feeling she'd had when her last employer accused her of stealing jewelry that had simply been misplaced. The same feeling she'd had when the bank teller made her show 3 forms of ID to cash her paycheck. The same feeling she got when people looked at her like she didn't belong in nice places. She finished dusting the hallway in silence, moving mechanically from room to room. When she reached the guest bathroom, she scrubbed the already clean fixtures until they gleamed. Physical work helped sometimes. It gave her somewhere to put the anger and hurt, so they wouldn't eat her alive. By the time she made it back downstairs, it was nearly 11 o'clock. Ethan was still in his office, but she could smell the coffee getting old in the kitchen. She dumped it out and started a fresh pot, then began preparing lunch. He liked simple foods, sandwiches, salads, nothing too fancy or ethnic, as he'd once put it. She was slicing tomatoes when her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "How's the job going? Still putting up with Mr. Perfect?" Naomi stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "It's fine. How are classes?" "Good. Made Dean's List again. Thanks to you." That made her smile, despite everything. Lila was going to be a teacher, and she was smart and kind, and everything Naomi wished she could have been at that age. Everything she could still be, if she could just get through this job and save enough money to go back to school herself. "Proud of you," she texted back. "Love you too, sis. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Too late for that today, Naomi thought, but she sent back a heart emoji and put her phone away. She was arranging Ethan's lunch on a plate when he emerged from his office, looking frustrated about something. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there this morning. "Rough call?" she asked before she could stop herself. It wasn't really her place to ask about his business, but the words slipped out. He looked surprised that she'd spoken to him directly. "Just family stuff," he said after a moment. "My aunt has opinions about everything." Naomi nodded and set his plate on the kitchen island. Turkey sandwich with avocado, side salad with the dressing he liked, and a glass of iced tea with just a little sugar. The same lunch he had most days when he worked from home. "This looks good," he said, settling onto one of the bar stools. "Thanks." It was the first time he'd ever thanked her for anything. The unexpectedness of it caught her off guard, and she felt her carefully maintained composure waver slightly. "You're welcome," she managed. He took a bite of his sandwich, then paused. "You know, I never asked, Where did you learn to cook? Another surprise. In the 6 months she'd worked for him, he'd never asked her a personal question. My mama taught me, she said carefully, and I picked up some things working at the diner downtown. You worked at Murphy's? He named the only diner in town, a place that served comfort food to locals and probably wasn't fancy enough for someone like him. Yes, sir, for about 2 years. Huh. He seemed to consider this. I've never eaten there, but I've heard the food is good. It is. She didn't mention that the food was good because the cooks, most of them black women like herself, had learned to make miracles with whatever ingredients they had. They didn't have the luxury of imported olive oil and organic vegetables like the kitchen she was standing in now. Ethan took another bite of his sandwich, and Naomi noticed he was eating faster than usual. His hand kept moving to his throat, like something was bothering him. Everything okay with your lunch? She asked. Fine, he said quickly, but there was something in his voice that didn't sound right. Just need some water. She filled a glass with ice water and set it in front of him. He drank it quickly, then went back to eating. But his breathing seemed a little off, and there were small beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Mr. Caldwell, are you feeling all right? He was about to answer when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and sighed. I have to take this, he said, answering the call. Hello, Martha. Even from across the kitchen, Naomi could hear the sharp voice of the woman on the other end. Aunt Martha, apparently, was not happy about something. I understand your concerns, Ethan said, his voice taking on a patient but strained tone. But I'm handling my household the way I see fit. More sharp words from Martha. She's not a problem, I told you. She does her job and minds her own business. He glanced at Naomi, who was trying to look busy wiping down counters that were already clean. No, I don't think that's necessary. I can manage my own staff. Staff. As if she were one of many instead of the only person who worked in his house. As if she were part of some grand household instead of a woman who cleaned and cooked for a man who barely saw her as human. Martha, I need to go, Ethan said finally. We'll talk about this later. He hung up and rubbed his temples, looking more tired than frustrated now. Sorry about that, he said to Naomi. Family. I understand, she said, though she really didn't. Her family might drive her crazy sometimes, but they never made her feel ashamed of her choices or the people in her life. Ethan finished his lunch in silence, but Naomi noticed he kept touching his throat. When he stood up from the stool, he swayed slightly and had to steady himself against the counter. Are you sure you're feeling okay? She asked again, this time with real concern in her voice. I'm fine, he insisted, but his voice sounded tight. Just tired. I think I'll go lie down for a few minutes. He headed toward the stairs, but halfway across the living room, he stopped. His hand went to his chest and his breathing became labored and audible. Mr. Caldwell? He turned toward her and she could see panic starting to fill his green eyes. His face was pale and he was struggling to get air into his lungs. Can't breathe, he managed to whisper. Naomi dropped her cleaning cloth and rushed to his side as his knees buckled. She caught him under the arms just as he collapsed, his full weight nearly taking them both down. But she was stronger than she looked. Years of physical work had made her that way, and she managed to ease him to the floor. Mr. Caldwell, can you hear me? She knelt beside him, her mind racing through possibilities. Heart attack? Allergic reaction? Panic attack? His breathing was getting worse and his lips were starting to turn blue around the edges. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance at 247 Magnolia Street, she said, trying to keep her voice calm and clear. A 29-year-old man is having trouble breathing. He collapsed and his lips are turning blue. Is he conscious? Naomi looked down at Ethan, whose eyes were open but unfocused. Yes, but barely. He's struggling to breathe. Okay, I'm sending an ambulance now. Can you tell me what happened before he collapsed? He was eating lunch and said his throat felt funny. Then he said he couldn't breathe. Was he eating anything he might be allergic to? Naomi's mind raced through the ingredients in his sandwich. Turkey, avocado, lettuce, tomato, the bread she'd used. I don't know about allergies. He's eaten this kind of sandwich before. All right, help is on the way. I need you to stay with him and keep him calm. If he stops breathing, you may need to perform CPR. The thought terrified her, but she nodded even though the dispatcher couldn't see her. Okay. Are you trained in CPR? A little. She'd taken a basic first aid class years ago when she worked at the diner, but she'd never had to use it on a real person. Ethan's eyes found hers, and she could see the fear there. The same fear she'd felt so many times in her own life, but for different reasons. The fear of not being able to control what happened next. It's going to be okay, she told him, reaching down to squeeze his hand. Help is coming. Just try to stay calm and breathe slowly. He squeezed back weakly, and she realized this was the first time they'd ever really touched. The first time he'd ever looked at her like she was a real person instead of a piece of furniture that happened to clean his house. The paramedics should be there in about 5 minutes, the dispatcher said. How's he doing? Naomi checked Ethan's breathing. It was still labored, but he seemed slightly more alert. He's hanging in there, she said. Still breathing, still conscious. Good. You're doing great. Just keep talking to him. So she did. She told him about the ambulance coming, about how everything would be fine, about how he just needed to hold on a little longer. She found herself smoothing his hair back from his forehead, the way her mother used to do when she was sick as a child. It was an automatic gesture, born from compassion rather than obligation. When the paramedics finally arrived, Naomi felt like she'd been holding her breath for hours. 2 men in uniform rushed into the house with their equipment, and suddenly the quiet living room was full of efficient movement and medical terminology she didn't understand. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" one of them asked, while the other began checking Ethan's vital signs. She repeated everything she'd told the 911 dispatcher, adding details about the timeline and what he'd eaten. They asked about his medical history, medications, and known allergies, and she realized how little she actually knew about the man she worked for every day. "I don't know," she had to say over and over. "I'm sorry. I don't know." But they didn't seem to judge her for not knowing. They were too focused on helping Ethan, who was now breathing with the help of an oxygen mask. His color was already looking better, and some of the panic had faded from his eyes. "Looks like a severe allergic reaction," one of the paramedics said to his partner. "We need to get him to the hospital." As they prepared to move Ethan to the stretcher, he reached out and grabbed Naomi's hand. His eyes met hers over the oxygen mask, and she saw something in them she'd never seen before. Gratitude. Real, honest gratitude. "You'll be okay," she told him again. "They're going to take good care of you." He squeezed her hand once more before the paramedics wheeled him away, leaving her standing alone in the suddenly quiet house. Her hands were shaking, she realized. Her whole body was shaking. She sank down onto the couch where she'd never been invited to sit, and for the first time since she'd started working in this house, she cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing she'd done something right, that when it mattered, she'd been there, she'd helped, she'd made a difference. Even if he went back to treating her like furniture tomorrow, she would always know that today, for a few terrifying minutes, she had been exactly where she needed to be. Outside, she could hear the ambulance siren fading into the distance, carrying Ethan toward help, and carrying away the strange, quiet afternoon when everything between them had changed. She sat in the empty house as the sun began to set, waiting. For news, for instructions, for some sign of what came next. But mostly, she sat and marveled at how quickly life could change, how a moment of crisis could strip away all the pretense and leave just 2 people, one needing help and one willing to give it. It was the most human she'd felt in months. The house felt different in the evening light. Naomi had never been alone here after dark before. She usually finished her work and retreated to her small apartment above the garage by 6 o'clock. But tonight, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. She'd spent the last few hours cleaning up the chaos from the paramedics' visit. Medical equipment wrappers, muddy footprints from their boots, the lunch dishes still sitting on the counter from when everything went wrong. Keeping busy helped quiet the anxious thoughts spinning in her head. What if she hadn't been there? What if she'd been upstairs cleaning and hadn't heard him collapse? The questions wouldn't stop coming. Her phone had been silent since the ambulance left. She didn't know which hospital they'd taken him to, didn't know who to call for updates. She realized that in 6 months of working for Ethan Caldwell, she'd never gotten a single emergency contact. She was trusted to be in his house, to handle his food and belongings, but she wasn't trusted with basic information about his life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Around 8 o'clock, she finally called Lila. She needed to hear a familiar voice. "Hey, sis," Lila answered on the second ring. You sound weird. Everything okay? Naomi settled into one of the kitchen chairs, another first. My boss had some kind of allergic reaction today. Had to call an ambulance. Oh my God, is he okay? I don't know. They took him to the hospital hours ago, and I haven't heard anything. Why are you still at the house then? Shouldn't. You go home? Naomi looked around the pristine kitchen, trying to put her feelings into words. I guess I felt like I should wait. Make sure someone knows what happened when people start calling. That's sweet of you, but Naomi, Lila's voice got gentler. You know he wouldn't do the same for you, right? It was true, and they both knew it. If Naomi had collapsed in his kitchen, Ethan would have called 911 and probably left for a business meeting while the paramedics handled the rest. He certainly wouldn't have spent hours sitting in her apartment, worried about her recovery. I know, Naomi said quietly, but I couldn't just leave. What if? Her phone beeped with another call. The number looked like a hospital. Lila, I have to go. The hospital's calling. Call me back, okay? And Naomi, you did a good thing today. She switched to the other call with trembling fingers. Hello? Is this Naomi Brooks? A woman's voice, professional but kind. Yes. This is Sarah Chen, a nurse at Cedar Falls General Hospital. Mr. Caldwell is asking for you. He wanted me to call and let you know he's stable and doing well. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she had to sit down. Oh, thank God. Will he be okay? He's going to be fine. It was a severe allergic reaction, but we caught it in time. The doctor said you probably saved his life by getting help so quickly. Saved his life. The words felt surreal. I just called 911. Anyone would have done the same thing. Maybe, the nurse said, but you're the one who did it. Mr. Caldwell wanted me to ask if you could come in tomorrow morning. He'd like to speak with you. Naomi hesitated. Hospital visits felt too personal, too much like crossing the invisible line between employer and employee. I don't know if that's appropriate. He specifically requested it, the nurse said gently. Visiting hours start at 9. Okay, Naomi heard herself say. I'll be there. After hanging up, she sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Through the windows, she could see lights coming on in the neighbors' houses. Normal people having normal evenings, eating dinner and watching TV and helping kids with homework. She wondered what that felt like, to have a life that predictable and safe. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Caleb Moore, Ethan's friend. Heard about today, thank you. She stared at the message, surprised. She'd never met any of Ethan's friends, but apparently word was already spreading. In a town this small, news traveled fast. She typed back, just glad he's okay. The response came quickly. Still, thank you. By 9 o'clock, she couldn't put off going home any longer. She locked up the house and walked across the darkened yard to her apartment. The small space felt even smaller tonight, cramped and lonely after spending the day in the big house. She made herself a simple dinner and tried to watch TV, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment when Ethan's hand had grabbed hers, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd looked at her like he was really seeing her for the first time. She was still thinking about it when she finally fell asleep. The next morning, Naomi stood outside Cedar Falls General Hospital, trying to work up the courage to go inside. The building was older, made of red brick with white columns that were supposed to look elegant, but mostly just looked tired. She'd been born in this hospital 26 years ago, and it hadn't changed much since then. She'd dressed carefully, her best jeans and a blue blouse that Lila said brought out her eyes. Not too fancy, but respectful. She wasn't sure what the protocol was for visiting your employer in the hospital after saving their life. The elevator ride to the third floor felt endless. Room 314, the nurse had said. She found it easily enough, but paused outside the door when she heard voices inside. Shouldn't have called her, a sharp female voice was saying. It's inappropriate, Ethan. She's an employee. She saved my life, Martha. Aunt Martha was here. Of course she was. Naomi recognized the voice from the phone call she'd overheard yesterday. That's what 911 is for, Martha continued. She did what anyone would do. It doesn't mean you owe her anything special. I'm not talking about owing her anything. I wanted to thank her properly. And you can do that with a bonus in her paycheck. You don't need to blur the lines by having personal conversations with the help. The help. There was that phrase again. Naomi felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She was about to turn around and leave when she heard Ethan's voice, stronger now and with an edge she'd never heard before. Her name is Naomi, and she's not just the help. She's a person who stayed calm under pressure and probably saved my life while you were 40 miles away complaining about her existence. Silence from Martha. And for the record, Ethan continued, I'll decide who I want to thank and how I want to thank them. In my house and in my hospital room. Naomi stood frozen outside the door, not sure whether to be grateful for his defense or hurt that it had taken a medical emergency for him to see her as human. She heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, then Martha's voice again, colder now. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you about getting too familiar with these people. These people. Again. Heavy footsteps moved toward the door, and Naomi quickly stepped to the side. A moment later, a tall, elegant woman in an expensive-looking suit emerged from the room. Martha Caldwell had silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun and the kind of posture that suggested she'd never doubted her place in the world. Her eyes swept over Naomi dismissively, not recognizing her as anyone important enough to notice. Naomi waited until Martha's footsteps faded down the hallway before knocking softly on the doorframe. "Come in," Ethan called. He was sitting up in bed wearing a hospital gown that made him look younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. There was still an IV in his arm, and his usually perfect hair was messy, but his color was good and his breathing seemed normal. "Naomi," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't identify. Relief? Gratitude? Something else? "Thank you for coming." She stepped into the room hesitantly. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. The doctor said I can probably go home this afternoon." He gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Please, sit down." She perched on the edge of the chair, keeping her purse in her lap like she might need to leave quickly. Hospital rooms always made her nervous, too many memories of visiting her grandmother here in the final months of her life. "The nurse said you saved my life," Ethan said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "I just called for help. The paramedics did all the real work. You did more than that." His green eyes were serious, focused on her face in a way they'd never been before. "You stayed calm. You knew exactly what to do. And you—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "You stayed with me. You held my hand and told me everything would be okay." She felt heat rising in her cheeks. Anyone would have done the same thing. Would they? He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "I keep thinking about it, and I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure I would have done the same thing if our positions had been reversed." The honesty in his admission surprised her. She'd expected thanks, maybe a bonus like Martha had suggested. She hadn't expected this kind of raw self-reflection. "You would have," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. "Maybe. I'd like to think so. But the truth is, I've never really thought about you as—" He stopped, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "This is coming out wrong." "As a person?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, sharper than she'd intended. He flinched like she'd slapped him. "I deserve that." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Naomi could hear the sounds of the hospital around them, nurses talking in the hallway, the beep of machines, a TV playing somewhere nearby. Normal sounds of life going on while they sat in this strange bubble of honesty. "I've been thinking all night," Ethan said finally, "about things I've said, things I've assumed, the way I've treated you." He looked down at his hands. "I'm ashamed of myself." Naomi didn't know what to say to that. In her experience, white people who said they were ashamed usually wanted her to comfort them, to tell them they weren't that bad, to make them feel better about their guilt. She'd learned not to do that work for people. "I heard your phone call yesterday," she said instead, "with your aunt, about me knowing my place." His face went pale. "Naomi, I heard what you said to her just now." "In here," she met his eyes steadily. "So which one is the real you? The one who talks about me like I'm furniture when you think I can't hear? Or the one who defends me when you're feeling grateful?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something internal. Finally he said, "I think the real me is someone who's been raised to see the world in a certain way and who's never questioned it because it was comfortable. But comfortable doesn't make it right. It wasn't the answer she'd expected. She'd been braced for excuses or defensiveness or the kind of non-apology that didn't really apologize for anything. The doctor said I'm allergic to something called tree nuts, he continued. Apparently, I've been developing the allergy for months without knowing it, and yesterday it finally got bad enough to be dangerous. The pesto I put on my sandwich had pine nuts in it. Pesto? Naomi frowned. I didn't put pesto on your sandwich. No, I did. After you made it, there was some in the fridge left over from when I had dinner with friends last week. He looked embarrassed. I thought it would taste good with the turkey. So it wasn't even anything she'd done. If he hadn't added the pesto himself, none of this would have happened. The irony was almost funny. I guess I owe my life to your questionable lunch choices, she said, and was surprised when it came out sounding almost like a joke. He smiled, a real smile, not the polite, distant one she was used to. I guess you do. The worst part is, I didn't even ask you if pesto would go with turkey. You probably could have told me it was a bad idea. Probably, she agreed, but you've never asked my opinion about anything before. Another uncomfortable truth hanging in the air between them. I know, he said quietly, and I'd like to change that, if you'll let me. Naomi studied his face, looking for signs of the patronizing tone she was used to, the subtle condescension that meant he was just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. But there was something different in his expression now, something uncertain and genuine. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to start over, not as employer and employee exactly, but as people who share the same space, people who could maybe even be friends if that's something you'd be interested in. Friends. The word sounded strange coming from him. I don't know if that's a good idea, Mr. Caldwell. Ethan, he said, and why not? She gestured around the hospital room. Because yesterday was unusual. You were scared and grateful, and I was there to help. But tomorrow you'll go back to your normal life, and I'll go back to cleaning your house and being invisible. That's just how these things work. What if it didn't have to work that way? It always works that way. She stood up, suddenly feeling like the walls of the small room were closing in. People don't really change, Mr. Caldwell. Not the important things anyway. They just feel guilty for a while, and then they go back to being who they've always been. Naomi, wait. There was something urgent in his voice that made her pause at the door. You're right. People usually don't change, but maybe sometimes they can try. Maybe sometimes something happens that makes them want to be better than they've been. She turned back to look at him. He was sitting up straighter now, and there was something in his eyes that might have been hope. I can't promise I'll get it right immediately, he said. I've got 29 years of bad habits to unlearn. But I can promise I'll try. And I can promise that when I mess up, which I probably will, it won't be because I don't think you're worth the effort. For a moment she wavered. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to think that yesterday had changed something fundamental, that the man who'd held her hand while he struggled to breathe was the real Ethan Caldwell, not the one who talked about her like she wasn't human. But she'd been disappointed before, by employers who promised fair treatment and then paid her less than their white employees, by teachers who said they believed in her potential and then steered her away from advanced classes, by a boyfriend who said he loved her and then cheated with a girl who fit better into his family's expectations. I need to think about it, she said finally. He nodded. That's fair. Take all the time you need. She was halfway out the door when he called her name one more time. Naomi, thank you. For saving my life, yes, but also for being honest with me just now. I know it wasn't easy. She looked back at him. This man who'd employed her for 6 months without really seeing her, who'd defended her to his aunt, but still called her the help when he thought she couldn't hear. This man who was asking her to believe he could change. You're welcome, she said, and left before either of them could say anything else that might complicate the fragile understanding they'd just reached. As she walked out of the hospital into the bright morning sunlight, Naomi found herself thinking about her grandmother's last words to her. Baby girl, some people are worth the risk of believing in. The trick is knowing which ones. She still didn't know if Ethan Caldwell was one of them, but for the first time in 6 months, she was curious enough to find out. 20. The next few days passed in a strange sort of dance. Ethan came home from the hospital that afternoon, and Naomi found herself listening for sounds that he was okay, His footsteps on the stairs, the coffee maker running in the morning, the low murmur of his voice on business calls. She told herself it was just concern for someone who'd recently had a medical emergency, but she knew it was more complicated than that. He was different when he came back. Not dramatically, she wasn't expecting miracles, but in small ways that were impossible to ignore. He said please when he asked her to do something. He said thank you when she brought him his coffee. He asked how her day was going and actually waited for an answer. The changes were so subtle that she wondered if she was imagining them, reading too much into politeness that might just be leftover gratitude from the hospital. But then he did something that made it clear the shift was real. It was Thursday morning, 3 days after the hospital visit. Naomi was in the kitchen preparing his usual breakfast when she heard him on the phone in his office. Nothing unusual about that. He was always on calls. But this time, she could hear her name being mentioned again. She froze, remembering the last time she'd overheard him talking about her. But this conversation was different. "No, Martha, I'm not going to fire her," Ethan was saying, his voice patient but firm. "And I'm not going to find someone else." Sharp words from Martha that Naomi couldn't make out. "Because she's good at her job, she's trustworthy, and she saved my life. But more than that, she deserves to be treated with respect, and that's what she's going to get in my house." More protests from Martha. "I don't care what people think," Ethan said, his voice getting stronger. "And frankly, I'm disappointed that you do. Naomi is staying, and that's final." Naomi stood motionless by the stove, gripping the spatula she'd been using to scramble eggs. He was defending her again, but this time it wasn't just the heat of the moment in a hospital room. This was a calm, deliberate choice to stand up for her when she wasn't even there to hear it. "Martha," Ethan continued, "I love you, but this conversation is over. I'll talk to you later." Naomi quickly busied herself with breakfast, trying to process what she'd just heard. When Ethan came into the kitchen a few minutes later, she had his plate ready, scrambled eggs with cheese, wheat toast, and fresh fruit. "Morning," he said, settling at the kitchen island. "Good morning." She poured his coffee and set it beside his plate, then moved to clean up the pan she'd used. But instead of immediately leaving the kitchen like she usually did, she found herself lingering. "Naomi?" Ethan's voice made her turn around. "Would you like to sit down for a minute? Have some coffee?" The invitation surprised her. "I still have work to do upstairs." "It can wait 5 minutes, can it?" She hesitated, then pulled out the stool across from him and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot. The kitchen felt different with both of them sitting at the island, less like a workspace and more like what it was supposed to be, a place where people gathered and talked. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Any more problems with the allergy?" "No, I'm good. The doctor gave me one of those emergency injector pens just in case." He took a bite of eggs, then looked at her directly. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Naomi's stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The speech about boundaries, about keeping things professional, about how their moment in the hospital didn't change anything fundamental between them. "I know I said I wanted to start over," Ethan continued, "but I realized I don't actually know how to do that. I've never had to unlearn the way I was raised to think about, well, about people who aren't like me." She waited, not sure where this was going. "So I was wondering if you could help me understand when I'm doing it wrong, when I'm saying things that are hurtful or treating you in a way that's not okay." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I know it's not your job to educate me, and I know it's not fair to ask you to point out every time I mess up, but I don't trust myself to recognize it on my own yet." It was such an unexpected request that Naomi didn't know how to respond at first. Most people who claimed they wanted to change expected her to do the emotional work of making them feel good about their efforts. But Ethan seemed to understand that changing required actual effort on his part. "You want me to tell you when you're being racist," she said, testing the words. He winced slightly at the directness, but nodded. "Yes. I know that sounds awful when you put it like that, but yes. I'd rather hear it from you than keep hurting you without realizing it." Naomi sipped her coffee, thinking. "Okay, but if I'm going to be honest with you, you have to be ready to hear things you don't want to hear. And you can't get defensive or angry when I point things out. I understand. And you have to believe me when I tell you something is hurtful, even if you didn't mean it that way. Intent doesn't erase impact. Okay. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Can you give me an example of something I've done wrong? Something specific?" Naomi thought about all the small cuts from the past 6 months. There were so many to choose from. "Last month," she said finally, "you had friends over for dinner. I served the meal and you introduced me as Naomi. She takes care of everything around here." Your friends barely looked at me, just nodded and went back to their conversation like I was part of the furniture. Ethan frowned. "What should I have done differently? You could have introduced me by name and given me the same courtesy you'd give any other person. A simple, 'Naomi, these are my friends Mike and Sarah. Mike and Sarah, this is Naomi.' Let me be part of the conversation for a minute, instead of just the person who serves food and disappears." "I never thought about it that way." "That's the problem," Naomi said gently. "You don't have to think about it because it doesn't affect you. I think about it every time I'm in a room with your friends or family because I know I'm being judged, dismissed, or ignored based on assumptions about who they think I am." Ethan was quiet, absorbing this. "What else?" "The way you talk about these people when you think I can't hear. The way you assume I'm grateful for this job instead of asking if I'm happy with it. The way you've never asked me anything about my life, my goals, my family." She paused. "The way you leave money on the counter for me instead of handing it to me directly, like I'm not worth the personal interaction." Each example seemed to hit him like a small blow. She could see him remembering instances, recognizing patterns he'd never noticed before. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm really, truly sorry. I appreciate that, but apologies don't mean much if the behavior doesn't change." "Then help me change it." There was something almost desperate in his voice. "I know I don't have any right to ask this of you, especially after the way I've treated you, but I want to be better. I need to be better." Naomi studied his face, looking for signs of performative guilt or white savior complex. But what she saw looked like genuine remorse and a willingness to do uncomfortable work. "Okay," she said finally, "but we start small. And if at any point this feels like too much work or too much emotional labor, I'm going to step back." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you." Over the next week, their relationship began to shift in ways that were sometimes awkward but felt genuine. Ethan started asking her opinion about small things, what she thought of his lunch choices, whether the living room furniture should be rearranged, if the new brand of coffee he'd bought was any good. Simple questions that acknowledged she had thoughts and preferences worth considering. He began paying her weekly, instead of leaving cash on the counter, handing her the envelope directly and thanking her for her work. When his friend Caleb stopped by to fix a leaky faucet, Ethan made a point of including Naomi in the conversation, asking her if she'd noticed any other plumbing issues around the house. Small changes, but they mattered. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when Ethan would start to say something and then stop himself, clearly recognizing it was wrong but not sure what the right thing was. Times when Naomi had to bite her tongue to keep from laughing at how hard he was trying to be politically correct. But there were also moments of genuine connection, like when she mentioned that her sister was studying to be a teacher and Ethan spent 10 minutes asking thoughtful questions about Lila's program and career goals. Or when he noticed she was limping slightly after a long day of cleaning and insisted she sit down while he got her an ice pack for her foot. "You don't have to take care of me," she'd protested. "I know I don't have to," he'd replied. "I want to." It was the first time in 6 months that she'd felt cared for in his house, rather than just useful. The biggest test came on a Friday evening when Martha Caldwell showed up unannounced. Naomi was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when she heard the familiar sharp voice in the entryway. "Ethan, we need to talk." "Hello, Martha, come in. I've been hearing things around town about you and your employee." The way she said employee made it clear she had other words in mind. "People are starting to talk." Naomi moved closer to the kitchen door, not quite eavesdropping but not making any effort to avoid hearing either. "What kind of things are people saying?" Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. "That you're getting too familiar with her. That she's spending too much time in the main house instead of her place above the garage. That you were seen talking to her in the front yard where neighbors could see." And what exactly is wrong with any of that? Ethan, be practical. You have a reputation to maintain in this community. Your family has a certain standing. My family's standing isn't threatened by me treating my employees with basic human decency. People will get the wrong idea. What wrong idea would that be exactly? There was a long pause, and Naomi could almost hear Martha choosing her words carefully. You know what I mean, Martha said finally. A young, unmarried man and a black girl living on the same property, being friendly with each other. People will draw conclusions. The words hit Naomi like ice water. There it was, the real fear underlying all of Martha's disapproval. Not just that Ethan was treating his employee well, but that people might think there was something romantic or sexual between them. The old, ugly stereotype that black women were always trying to seduce white men, always looking for ways to climb the social ladder through relationships. First of all, Ethan said, his voice getting cold, Naomi is a woman, not a girl. She's 26 years old with her own life and her own goals. Second, the only wrong conclusion here is the one you're drawing. Naomi and I are developing a friendship based on mutual respect, and if that threatens your sense of propriety, that's your problem, not mine. Ethan, I'm trying to protect you. From what? From learning to see someone as a human being instead of a stereotype? From having to examine my own prejudices? From becoming a better person? His voice was getting stronger, more confident. Because if that's what you're protecting me from, I don't want your protection. Naomi pressed her back against the kitchen wall, torn between admiration for his defense of her and hurt that her very existence in his life was something that needed defending. She saved my life, Martha. She stayed calm when I was dying, held my hand when I was scared, and made sure I got the help I needed. And for 6 months before that, she kept my house running, made my meals, and asked for nothing but fair pay and basic respect. If the people in this town want to turn that into something ugly that says everything about them and nothing about her, you're being naive. No, I'm being decent, finally. And if you can't support that, if you can't see Naomi as the good person she is instead of whatever racist caricatures in your head, then maybe you need to examine what that says about you. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. When Martha spoke again, her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Fine. But don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face. It won't. And even if it did, it would be worth it to know I did the right thing for once in my life. Naomi heard the front door slam, followed by the sound of Martha's car starting in the driveway. She stood in the kitchen, processing what she'd just heard. Ethan hadn't just defended her, he'd chosen her friendship over his family's approval. He'd called her a good person, not just a good employee. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, and he looked emotionally drained. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he said. I'm not, Naomi replied, surprising them both. I'm glad I know where you stand. He leaned against the doorframe, looking tired but resolute. Where I stand is on your side. I hope you know that. For the first time since she'd started working for him, Naomi felt like she might actually be able to trust him. Not completely. Trust was something that had to be earned slowly, proven through consistent actions over time. But enough to believe that the man who'd defended her to his aunt was the real Ethan Caldwell, not the one who'd dismissed her for 6 months. I'm starting to, she said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Naomi felt like she might actually want to stay somewhere instead of constantly planning her escape. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Martha, Naomi noticed something she hadn't expected. She was happy. Not just content or satisfied with her job, but genuinely happy to wake up each morning and walk across the yard to the main house. She found herself looking forward to the small conversations she and Ethan had begun having over coffee. She enjoyed the way he asked her opinion about everything from what color to paint the guest bathroom to whether she thought it might rain. It was a dangerous feeling, happiness. In her experience, good things had a way of disappearing just when she started counting on them. You're humming, Lila pointed out during their weekly phone call. You never hum when you talk to me. I didn't realize I was humming. Naomi tucked the phone between her shoulder and ear as she folded laundry in her small apartment. It's a good thing. You sound lighter, like some weight got lifted off your shoulders. Maybe it did. So things are really better with Mr. Perfect? Naomi smiled at the nickname. His name is Ethan. And yeah, things are better. Really better. Better how? Is he paying you more? No, though he did give me a raise last week. It's more than that. Naomi tried to put it into words. He sees me now. Actually sees me as a person with thoughts and feelings and opinions, and he listens when I talk. That's literally the bare minimum of human decency, Naomi. I know, but you know how it's been for me in jobs like this. The bare minimum feels like a gift sometimes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just be careful, okay? I know you've been hurt before by people who seemed nice until they didn't. This is different. I hope so. But promise me you won't forget who you are just because someone finally started treating you right. After they hung up, Naomi thought about Lila's warning. Her sister had always been more suspicious of white people's motives, more protective of her heart. Maybe that came from being younger, from having Naomi shield her from some of the worst experiences. Or maybe Lila was just smarter about protecting herself. But Naomi didn't think she was losing herself in Ethan's newfound respect. If anything, she felt more like herself than she had in months, more willing to speak up, to share her thoughts, to take up space in conversations instead of just listening from the sidelines. The real test of their changing relationship came on a Thursday afternoon when Ethan's friend Caleb stopped by to install new light fixtures in the dining room. Naomi had met Caleb briefly before, a tall, easygoing guy with calloused hands and an honest face. He ran his own handyman business and seemed to be Ethan's closest friend in town. "Hey, Naomi," Caleb said when she answered the door. "Ethan around?" "He's in his office on a call. Come on in. Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee would be great, thanks." She led him to the kitchen and poured him a cup, adding the cream and sugar she'd noticed he liked during his previous visits. It was a small gesture, but one that would have been unthinkable a month ago. Back then, she would have served him coffee and disappeared. Now, she found herself staying to chat. "How's business been?" she asked. "Good. Really good, actually. Spring always brings a lot of repair jobs. People notice things that broke over the winter." He took a sip of coffee and smiled. "This is perfect. You remember how I like it. I pay attention to details, part of the job." "Is it? Or are you just considerate?" The question caught her off guard. She was used to people attributing her thoughtfulness to training or professionalism, not to her personality. "Maybe both," she said. Caleb nodded toward the direction of Ethan's office. "He's different lately. More, I don't know, present, like he's actually paying attention to the world around him instead of just moving through it. People can change. Some people can. Most people don't." Caleb studied her face. "Whatever you did, it worked. I didn't do anything special. I just treated him like a human being when he needed help." "And he finally started returning the favor?" Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to people acknowledging the inequality in her work relationships so directly. "Something like that." Before Caleb could respond, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Sorry about that. Conference call ran long." He smiled at Naomi. "Thanks for taking care of Caleb." "No problem." "Actually," Ethan said, "I was wondering if you'd want to stick around while Caleb works on the dining room fixtures. You have good taste, and I'd like your input on the placement." 6 months ago, such a request would have made her suspicious. What did he really want? Was this some kind of test? But now she found herself nodding without hesitation. "Sure, I'd be happy to help." The three of them spent the next hour working together. Caleb installing the new fixtures, Ethan holding them steady, and Naomi offering opinions on height and positioning. It felt natural, collaborative, like they were three adults working toward the same goal instead of a boss directing his employees. "A little higher on the left side," Naomi suggested, stepping back to examine the chandelier Caleb was hanging. "Like this?" Caleb adjusted the chain. "Perfect." "She's got a good eye," Caleb told Ethan. "Better than yours anyway. Remember when you wanted to put that huge mirror right over the fireplace?" "That would have looked good," Ethan protested. "It would have made the room look like a fun house," Naomi said, laughing. "See? She gets it," Caleb grinned. "You should listen to her more often." "I'm learning to," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made Naomi look at him more closely. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, warm, but also something else. Something that made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with friendship. The moment stretched between them until Caleb cleared his throat. "Should I leave you two alone, or—" "No," Naomi said quickly, then felt embarrassed by how fast she'd responded. "I mean, I should get back to work anyway. The upstairs bathroom needs cleaning." She escaped to the second floor, her heart beating faster than it should have been. She'd imagined that look, surely. Ethan was grateful to her, and maybe they were becoming friends, but anything beyond that was impossible. Wasn't it? She was still thinking about it an hour later when she heard Caleb's truck pull out of the driveway. A few minutes after that, Ethan appeared in the doorway of the bathroom she was cleaning. "Caleb's finished," he said. "The fixtures look great." "Good." He leaned against the doorframe, making no move to leave. "Naomi, can I ask you something?" She looked up from scrubbing the bathtub. "Sure." "Are you happy here? I mean, really happy, not just okay with the job?" The question surprised her, with its directness. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been thinking a lot lately about what you said in the hospital, about how people don't really change, how they just feel guilty for a while and then go back to being who they've always been." He paused. "I don't want that to be true about me." Naomi set down her scrub brush and turned to face him fully. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth, even if it's not what I want to hear." She considered this, looking at his face. There was vulnerability there, genuine concern about her answer. A month ago, he wouldn't have asked the question. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have cared about the answer. "I think you're trying," she said finally. "I think you're doing the work, which is more than most people do. But change is a process, not a destination. You don't just arrive at being a good person and stay there forever." "So you're saying I could still mess this up?" "You could, but I don't think you will. Not on purpose, anyway." Relief flickered across his features. "That's something, at least." "Ethan," she said, then stopped. She'd been about to call him Mr. Caldwell out of habit, but his first name had slipped out instead. It felt strange on her tongue, too familiar, too intimate. "What? Why does it matter to you, what I think, I mean? You could have just kept paying me and treating me politely and called that good enough. Why go further?" He was quiet for so long that she wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "Because when I was lying on that kitchen floor, unable to breathe, you looked at me like I mattered. Not my money or my family name or what I could do for you. Just me, as a person who was scared and needed help." He ran a hand through his hair. "I realized I'd never looked at you that way, and I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen like that all the time, not just in an emergency." The honesty in his admission took her breath away. She'd expected him to say something about guilt or doing the right thing. She hadn't expected him to admit that her compassion had changed something fundamental in how he wanted to exist in the world. "Oh," was all she managed to say. "I'm sorry if that's too much information. I don't want to make things weird between us." "It's not weird," she said quickly. "It's just honest. I'm not used to that level of honesty from employers." "Is that all I am to you? An employer?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them seemed ready to address directly. "I don't know," Naomi said truthfully. "I don't know what we are. Maybe we could figure it out together." Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it automatically and felt her stomach drop. It was from an unknown number, but the message was clear enough. "Saw you getting cozy with the white boy. Some of us remember where you come from." The words hit her like cold water, reminding her of realities she'd been trying not to think about. She and Ethan didn't exist in a bubble. They lived in a small southern town where people noticed everything and judged most of it, where a black woman and a white man being friendly was enough to start rumors that could follow her for years. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, noticing her expression. "Nothing," she lied, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Just my sister checking in." But the spell was broken. The safe space they'd been building in his house felt suddenly fragile, threatened by a world that might not let them be whatever they were becoming. "I should finish up here," she said, turning back to the bathtub. "Of course." He hesitated in the doorway. "Naomi?" "Yeah? Whatever we figure out, we'll figure it out at our own pace, okay? No pressure from anyone else." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After he left, she stared at the anonymous text message until the screen went dark. Then she deleted it and went back to scrubbing, trying to clean away the feeling that someone was watching her every move, waiting for her to step too far out of line. That night, alone in her apartment, she called Lila. "I think I'm in trouble," she said without preamble. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where I might be falling for my boss and people are starting to notice." "Oh, honey," Lila said softly, "that's the most dangerous kind of trouble there is.